The doorbell rang at 6:47 a.m., which was strange because nobody visits that early. And when I opened it, there stood my daughter Vanessa with 3 suitcases, 2 crying children, and a black eye she was trying to hide behind oversized sunglasses. "Mama, Raymond hit me again," she whispered, and before I could even process what was happening, she pushed past me into my small 2-bedroom house with her kids trailing behind, and just like that, my peaceful retirement vanished in an instant. Welcome to my channel where I share real stories about family, boundaries, and finding your voice when everyone expects you to stay silent. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button because you're going to want to hear how this ends. Now let me take you back to that morning, because what happened in the next 48 hours changed everything I thought I knew about being a good mother, a good grandmother, and a good woman who always puts everyone else first. I'm Beverly Jackson, 72 years old, retired postal worker, widowed for 14 years, and for most of my life, I believed that being a good woman meant saying yes to everyone who needed me, meant opening my door no matter what, meant sacrificing my peace for family harmony. That Tuesday morning when Vanessa arrived, I did exactly what I'd always done. I made space for her pain. I put on a pot of coffee, I hugged my grandchildren, Tyler and Maya, and I told her she could stay as long as she needed, even though my little house barely had room for me, let alone 3 extra people with their chaos and their trauma and their endless needs. What I didn't know that morning was that as long as she needed would turn into 6 months of my life disappearing, 6 months of me shrinking smaller and smaller in my own home, 6 months that would push me to a breaking point I never saw coming. The first week was manageable, or at least I told myself it was manageable, while I gave up my bedroom for Vanessa and the kids, while I slept on my own living room couch that hurt my 72-year-old back, while I used my fixed income to buy groceries for 4 people instead of 1, while I tiptoed around my own house trying not to wake anyone up. Vanessa was healing, I reminded myself every time I felt frustrated. She needed time to figure out her next move. She needed her mama's support. And what kind of mother would I be if I complained about a sore back or a tight budget when my daughter was recovering from abuse? So I stayed quiet, kept sacrificing, kept telling myself this was temporary, kept believing that being a good mother meant erasing myself until there was nothing left. By month 2, Raymond started calling my house phone at all hours, drunk and angry, demanding to talk to Vanessa, threatening to come over, leaving voicemails that made my hands shake when I listened to him. Vanessa refused to talk to him, which I understood and supported, but that meant I became the buffer, the one who had to answer his calls and try to calm him down and protect my daughter and grandchildren from his rage. I changed my phone number twice, but he always found the new one somehow, and the stress of it started affecting my sleep, my appetite, my blood pressure that my doctor kept warning me about. My own daughter never asked how I was handling it, never noticed that I had lost 12 pounds because I was giving the kids the bigger portions and eating whatever was left, never saw that I was taking antacids every night because my stomach was constantly churning with anxiety. Month 3 brought a new problem when Vanessa announced she was going back to school to get her nursing degree, which I thought was wonderful and brave and exactly what she needed to build a new life, until I realized what it actually meant for me. It meant she needed me to watch Tyler and Maya every day from 3 o'clock when they got home from school until 10 o'clock at night when she finished her evening classes, which meant I couldn't go to my book club anymore, couldn't make my Tuesday hair appointments, couldn't have dinner with my friend Dorothy, who lived 2 streets over and was the only person I could really talk to. It meant my quiet retirement had turned into full-time childcare, and when I gently suggested that maybe Vanessa could find an after-school program or arrange a babysitter, she looked at me with such hurt and disappointment that I immediately backed down and said of course I'd watch them. Family helps family, that's what grandmothers do. The breaking point started building in month 4 when Vanessa began dating someone new, a man named Terrence who seemed nice enough at first, bringing flowers and compliments and promises that he'd help her get back on her feet. But within 2 weeks, Terrence was practically living in my house too, sleeping in my bedroom with Vanessa, eating my food, using my shower, leaving his clothes in my bathroom, and acting like he had every right to be there even though nobody had asked my permission. I came home from the grocery store one afternoon to find Terrence sitting in my favorite chair watching a basketball game on my television at a volume that made my ears hurt. And when I politely asked him to turn it down, he looked at me like I was being unreasonable and said, "Come on, Miss Beverly, it's just the playoffs. Don't be like that." That night, I tried to talk to Vanessa about boundaries, about how this was still my house even though I was happy to help her, about how maybe Terrence shouldn't be staying over every night when we barely knew him. She got defensive immediately, told me I was being judgmental and controlling, said I obviously didn't want her to be happy after everything she'd been through with Raymond, accused me of trying to sabotage her new relationship just when she was finally starting to feel good again. "Mama, I thought you loved me," she said with tears streaming her face, and those words hit me like a punch, because of course I loved her. I loved her so much I'd given up my bedroom and my peace and my routine and my entire life to help her, but somehow expressing one small need of my own had turned me into the villain. Month 5 was when I started having chest pains, little squeezing sensations that came and went, but scared me enough that I made an appointment with my cardiologist. Dr. Hughes took one look at me, ran some tests, checked my blood pressure that had spiked to dangerous levels, and asked me point blank what was going on in my life because my body was showing serious signs of stress. I broke down in his office and told him everything. The crowded house, the sleepless nights on the couch, the financial strain, Raymond's threatening calls, Vanessa's boyfriend taking over my space, the constant feeling that I couldn't breathe in my own home. "Beverly, you're going to have a heart attack if you don't make some changes," Dr. Hughes said seriously, and he wrote me a prescription for blood pressure medication, but told me honestly that pills wouldn't fix the real problem, which was that I was sacrificing my health and well-being for people who weren't even noticing what it was costing me. I drove home from that appointment crying so hard I had to pull over twice, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes trying to compose myself before going inside. When I finally walked through my own front door, Terrence was in my kitchen cooking dinner using all my good pots and pans. Vanessa was on the phone laughing with a friend about her weekend plans. Tyler and Meyer were fighting over the television remote, and nobody even looked up when I came in. I stood there in my own entryway, holding my purse and my prescription bag, completely invisible in the home I'd worked 37 years to pay for, and something inside me just cracked open like an egg, spilling out years and years of unexpressed anger and resentment and grief. That night, after everyone went to bed, everyone in my bedroom except me on the couch as usual, I sat in my dark kitchen with a cup of tea and my mortgage papers and my bank statement spread out on the table. I looked at the deed with my name on it, Beverly Louise Jackson, sole owner of this property, and I realized that somehow I'd let everyone forget that fundamental fact, including myself. This wasn't Vanessa's house that I was living in. This wasn't a family home where everyone had equal say. This was my house that I had invited her into. And somewhere along the way, I'd given away all my power and let everyone treat me like a guest in my own space. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Dorothy's number. And even though it was after midnight, I called her. And when she answered, worried and confused, I said the words I should have said months ago. I need help, and I don't know what to do. Dorothy came over the next morning with coffee and donuts and a clear head, and she sat at my kitchen table and listened to me pour out 6 months of frustration and pain while Vanessa slept in and Terrence showered in my bathroom using my hot water. Beverly, you know I love you like a sister, Dorothy said when I finally ran out of words. But I've been watching you disappear for months, and I've been waiting for you to wake up and realize you don't have to live like this. This is your house. These are your rules. You have the right to set boundaries, even with your own daughter, especially with your own daughter. Because if you don't, you're going to end up in the hospital or worse. She pulled out her phone and showed me the number of a family counselor she knew, a woman named Patricia Mills, who specialized in helping people set healthy boundaries with relatives. And she made me promise I'd call that day, not tomorrow or next week, but that very day before I talked myself out of it. I called Patricia's office at 9:30 that morning from my car parked in the grocery store, sitting in the parking lot because it was the only place I could have a private conversation. Patricia answered herself, and something about her calm, professional voice made me feel safe enough to be completely honest. I told her everything without sugarcoating or making excuses, the 6 months of chaos, the chest pains, the feeling of being invisible, the guilt I felt for even wanting my own space back, the fear that setting boundaries would make me a bad mother. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something that changed my entire perspective. Beverly, do you know what you're actually teaching your grandchildren right now? You're teaching them that women should erase themselves for others, that asking for what you need makes you selfish, that love means accepting disrespect. Is that really the legacy you want to leave them? That question hit me harder than anything else had, because she was absolutely right. If Tyler grew up watching his grandmother get walked over and staying silent, he'd think that was how women should be treated. And if Maya grew up watching me shrink and apologize and accommodate everyone else's needs above my own, she'd think that was what it meant to be a good woman. I was modeling exactly the kind of behavior that had kept me stuck in this situation, and unless I changed, I'd be passing that prison down to the next generation. I want to be different, I told Patricia, my voice shaking but determined. I want them to see me stand up for myself. I just don't know how to start. Patricia scheduled an emergency appointment for that afternoon, told me to come alone without telling anyone where I was going, and said we'd make a plan together for how I could reclaim my life and my home. That afternoon, sitting in Patricia's office, I made a list of non-negotiable boundaries that felt both terrifying and liberating to write down. Vanessa and the kids could stay for 60 more days to give her time to find a place, but not indefinitely. Terrence was not welcome to sleep over anymore, starting immediately. I needed my bedroom back within 1 week. Vanessa would contribute $300 per month to household expenses, or she'd need to leave sooner. Family meetings would happen every Sunday where we'd discuss schedules and responsibilities and any issues that came up. And most importantly, I would stop apologizing for having needs and stop accepting blame for other people's problems and choices. Patricia looked at my list and nodded approvingly, then asked me the question I'd been dreading. When are you going to tell Vanessa? I felt my stomach drop because I knew that conversation was going to be awful. Knew Vanessa would cry and accuse me of abandoning her. Knew she'd probably call other family members and paint me as the bad guy. Knew she might even leave angry and cut me off completely. What if she hates me? I whispered. And Patricia leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. Beverly, she might be angry, and that's okay. Her anger doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means she's not getting her way anymore. And people who've benefited from your lack of boundaries often get upset when you finally establish them. But you know what? You teaching her to respect you is actually the most loving thing you can do, because right now, neither of you respect you. I drove home that evening with my list folded in my purse and my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I walked in, Vanessa was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone while Tyler and Maya ran wild through the house, and Terrence was in my kitchen again making himself a sandwich with my groceries. I stood in the doorway watching this scene like I was seeing it for the first time. My home that didn't feel like mine. My space invaded by people who took and took without ever asking what it cost me. My life on pause while everyone else lived theirs. Vanessa, I need to talk to you, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Now, just you and me. She looked up surprised because I never demanded her attention like that. I always waited for a convenient moment that never seemed to come. But something in my tone must have told her this was different because she actually put down her phone and followed me to the kitchen. I closed the kitchen door and pulled out my list with hands that shook just slightly. And before she could start talking or making excuses or deflecting, I said the words I'd been practicing all afternoon. Vanessa, I love you, and I'm glad I could help you when you needed it, but things are going to change starting today, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Her eyes went wide, and I saw her mouth open to protest, but I held up my hand and continued. This is my house. I bought it, I pay for it, and I have the right to decide who lives here and under what conditions. You and the kids can stay for 60 more days while you find your own place, but you'll need to contribute $300 a month for expenses. I need my bedroom back by next Tuesday, and Terrence is no longer welcome to stay overnight starting immediately. The words came out in a rush, and I watched Vanessa's face go through a rapid progression of emotions: shock, hurt, anger, disbelief, and when I finished, she just stared at me like I'd grown a second head, like she couldn't believe this was actually her mother talking. "Are you seriously kicking me out?" she finally said, her voice rising with each word. "After everything I've been through, after Raymond almost killed me, after I came to you because you're my mother and you're supposed to help me, you're just gonna throw me and your grandchildren out on the street?" The guilt hit me immediately like it always did, that old familiar feeling that I was being cruel and heartless and a bad mother, but I forced myself to remember what Patricia had said about anger and boundaries and teaching. "I'm not throwing you out," I replied as calmly as I could manage. "I'm giving you 60 days and clear expectations. That's help, Vanessa. What I've been doing for the past 6 months isn't help, it's enabling, and it's destroying my health in the process." I pulled out Dr. Hughes' paperwork showing my blood pressure readings and the prescription for medication I now needed because of stress, and I slid it across the table toward her. "This is what the past 6 months has done to me. I had chest pains. The doctor said I'm at risk for a heart attack, and you didn't even notice because you've been so focused on your own stuff that you haven't once asked how I'm doing." Vanessa looked at the paperwork, and I saw something flicker across her face. Was it guilt? Recognition? Shame? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by defensive anger. "So this is my fault now? I'm the reason you have high blood pressure? Mama, I can't believe you're blaming me for your health problems when I'm the one who got beaten by my husband." She stood up from the table and her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You know what? If that's how you feel, maybe we should just leave tonight. Come on, Tyler, Maya, start packing. Apparently your grandmother doesn't want us here anymore." She stormed toward the bedroom, and I felt panic rising in my chest, that old instinct to chase after her and apologize and take it all back and make peace. But I forced myself to stay seated at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the surface, grounding myself, breathing slowly, remembering Patricia's words about anger and boundaries. Tyler and Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway looking confused and scared, and Maya's eyes were already filling with tears. "Grandma, are we leaving? Did we do something wrong?" she asked in a small voice, and my heart broke because these kids were innocent in all this, caught in the middle of adult dysfunction they didn't create. I knelt down to their level and pulled them both into a hug. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweethearts," I said softly. "Grandma loves you so much. Your mama and I just need to figure some things out. But whatever happens, you're always going to be my grandchildren, and I'm always going to be here for you." Vanessa appeared with a suitcase in hand, her face red and blotchy from crying, and she grabbed both kids by their hands. "Say goodbye to Grandma, since she cares more about her precious house than she does about her own family." That accusation stung worse than anything else she could have said, and I felt tears starting to roll down my own cheeks, but I didn't back down. Vanessa, I care about you more than you know, and that's exactly why I'm doing this, I said, following them toward the front door. You can be angry at me, you can tell everyone I'm a terrible mother, you can leave right now if that's what you need to do, but those boundaries I set are final. If you decide to stay, you follow them. If you can't or won't, then yes, you need to find somewhere else. She turned to look at me one last time with so much hurt and anger in her eyes that I almost caved, almost said, forget everything I just said, please don't leave. But I gripped the doorframe and stayed silent. I'm taking the kids to Raymond's mother's house, she said, which made my stomach drop because Raymond's mother had always enabled his behavior and blamed Vanessa for his violence. That's your choice, I replied, even though inside I was screaming for her not to go there, not to put herself back in that orbit. My door is open if you change your mind and want to accept my boundaries. She left without another word, and I stood in my doorway watching her load the kids into her car and drive away. And when the taillights disappeared around the corner, I closed my door and slid down to the floor and sobbed harder than I'd cried in years. I called Dorothy, and she came over immediately, and she sat on the floor with me and held me while I questioned every decision I just made, while I wondered if I'd just destroyed my relationship with my daughter forever, while I imagined my grandchildren growing up thinking I didn't love them. You did the right thing, Dorothy kept repeating. It doesn't feel good right now, but you did the right thing. She'll realize it eventually. But sitting there on my living room floor, I wasn't so sure, and I wondered if setting boundaries was worth this price, worth this pain, worth the possibility that Vanessa might never forgive me. That night, I slept in my own bedroom for the first time in 6 months, but I barely slept at all, just stared at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over, imagining all the ways I could have said it differently or better or softer. My phone rang twice, Vanessa's number, and both times I let it go to voicemail, and both times the messages were angry, accusing me of abandoning her and the kids in their time of need, telling me she'd never forget this betrayal. I listened to those messages 3 times each, letting the words cut into me, and part of me wanted to call her back and apologize and beg her to come home. But a stronger part of me knew that this was the test Patricia had warned me about, that this was the moment where I either held firm or went back to being invisible forever. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee in a quiet house that felt both peaceful and horribly empty. I walked through each room slowly, noticing how it felt to have space again, to have silence, to have my things exactly where I'd left them without someone else moving or using or breaking them. It felt strange and wrong and right all at the same time, like I was rediscovering a home I'd forgotten I lived in. I sat in my favorite chair, the one Terrence had claimed for weeks, and I turned on the morning news at exactly the volume I wanted, and nobody told me it was too loud or changed the channel without asking, and that small moment of autonomy brought fresh tears to my eyes because I realized how much I'd missed being able to make simple choices in my own space. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize, and when I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. Your daughter and grandkids are here crying, saying you kicked them out. Family doesn't abandon family. You should be ashamed. Raymond's mother. I stared at that message feeling sick to my stomach, knowing that woman was probably filling Vanessa's head with poison, probably telling her that I was the problem, probably encouraging her to go back to Raymond because at least he provided a home. I wanted to text back and explain and defend myself, but Patricia's voice echoed in my head. Don't explain yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you. I blocked the number and deleted the message, and even though my hands were shaking, I felt a small surge of strength because I'd just done something I'd never done before. I'd refused to absorb someone else's judgment. Over the next 3 days, I heard nothing from Vanessa directly, but I heard plenty from other people. My sister called to tell me I was being too hard on Vanessa and needed to have more compassion. My cousin texted saying she couldn't believe I'd turned my back on my own daughter. Even my pastor from church reached out, gently suggesting that perhaps I should reconsider because family forgiveness was important. Every single one of those messages made me doubt myself, made me wonder if I was the villain in this story, made me question whether boundaries were actually just selfishness dressed up in therapy language. I spent hours journaling, talking to Dorothy, calling Patricia's emergency line, trying to hold on to the truth that I knew in my bones, that I hadn't abandoned Vanessa, I'd just stopped abandoning myself. On day 4, my doorbell rang at 7 in the morning, and when I opened it, Vanessa stood there alone, without the kids, looking exhausted and defeated. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly, and I stepped aside without a word. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd had our explosive conversation, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. "Raymond's mother's place is worse than I remembered," Vanessa said, staring at her hands. "She's drinking again, and Raymond keeps showing up even though he's not supposed to, and the kids are scared, and I realized that I left your house because I was angry, but I ran straight back into the same dysfunction I was trying to escape." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said about enabling versus helping, and I think maybe you're right. I think maybe I've been using you as a crutch instead of actually dealing with my problems." I felt hope rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Vanessa, I love you, and I want to help you build a real life, but I can't do it for you, and I can't destroy myself in the process." I pulled out the boundary list again, the one she'd barely looked at before storming out. "These are still my conditions if you want to come back. 60 days, $300 a month, my bedroom back, no Terrence staying over, family meetings every Sunday. Can you agree to that?" She stared at the paper for a long time, and I watched her face work through emotions, and finally she nodded slowly. "I can agree to that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll need help with the $300 this first month because I don't get paid until the 15th, but I promise I'll pay you back." I took a deep breath. "That's what the 60 days is for, so you can save up and find your own place. I'll waive the first month's contribution, but after that, the expectations stand." We sat in silence for another moment, and then Vanessa did something she hadn't done in months. She asked me a question about my life instead of just talking about her own. "Mama, are you okay? Like really okay?" And for the first time in our entire relationship, I answered honestly instead of saying what I thought she wanted to hear. "No, baby, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for months. I've been drowning and nobody noticed, including you, and that hurt more than anything." My voice cracked, but I kept going. "But I'm working on getting okay, and part of that means protecting myself even when it's hard, even when it makes people angry, even when it looks like I'm being mean. I went to the doctor and he said my blood pressure is dangerous, baby. Dangerous. This isn't about being selfish, it's about surviving." Vanessa's face crumpled and she started crying, real tears this time, not the manipulative crying she did when I first set boundaries, but genuine remorse and recognition. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I was so wrapped up in my own pain that I didn't see yours. I just assumed you were fine because you're always fine, because you're Mama and you're strong and you handle everything, but I never asked what it was costing you." She reached across the table and took my hands. "I want to do better. I want to be the kind of daughter who supports you instead of just taking from you. Will you help me learn how?" And in that moment, sitting in my kitchen with my broken, trying daughter, I felt something shift between us, something that felt like the beginning of a real relationship built on honesty instead of obligation. "We'll figure it out together," I said, squeezing her hands. "But Vanessa, if you move back in, you have to actually follow through on the boundaries. The minute you start slipping or making excuses or treating my expectations like they're negotiable, I'm going to call you on it, and you need to be ready to hear that without getting defensive or running away." She nodded firmly. "I understand. I promise I'll try." And even though I knew promises were easy and follow-through was hard, even though I knew there would be difficult conversations ahead and moments where she'd test those boundaries, I also knew that we'd just taken the first real step towards a healthier relationship, and that was worth the pain of the past few days. Vanessa and the kids moved back in that same afternoon, and this time everything felt different because now there were rules written down and consequences clearly stated and expectations that everyone understood from day one. I gave her a copy of the boundary list, laminated at the print shop so it couldn't be claimed later that anyone forgot or misunderstood what we'd agreed to, and I posted another copy on the refrigerator with magnets where everyone would see it multiple times every single day. Tyler looked at the list and asked me why Grandma suddenly had rules now, like a teacher at school, and I knelt down to his eye level and told him something I wish someone had explained to me when I was his age. Because love without boundaries isn't really love, sweetie. It's just people using each other until someone breaks, and I don't want anyone in this family to break anymore. He nodded seriously, even though I knew he didn't fully understand, and that small moment gave me hope that maybe I really was teaching these kids something valuable that would serve them their whole lives. The first Sunday family meeting was awkward and uncomfortable, with all four of us sitting around my dining room table with notebooks and pens like we were conducting some kind of official business meeting, which I guess we were in a way, the business of learning how to live together with mutual respect instead of just surviving each other. I'd printed out an agenda based on suggestions Patricia had given me during our last counseling session: household schedule review, chore distribution assignments, financial contribution expectations, communication guidelines, and weekly check-ins about how everyone was feeling emotionally. Vanessa looked deeply uncomfortable the entire time, fidgeting constantly with her pen and avoiding direct eye contact with me, while Tyler and Maya mostly just drew elaborate pictures on their blank papers and whispered to each other. But we got through the entire agenda, and by the end of that first meeting, we had an actual chart posted on the wall showing clear responsibilities for every person in the house. "This feels really weird, Mama," Vanessa admitted quietly as we were cleaning up the papers and putting away chairs. "It feels like we're roommates in a college dorm instead of family who love each other." I looked at her steadily without flinching and said something that surprised even myself as it came out of my mouth. "Maybe that's not such a terrible thing right now, Vanessa, because roommates actually respect each other's space and time and belongings and boundaries, and sometimes family members forget to do those basic things because they take each other for granted." Week 2 brought our first major test of the new system when Terrence showed up completely unannounced on Thursday evening around 6 o'clock, clearly expecting to stay for dinner and probably spend the night like he'd done so many times before when there were no rules and no consequences. I watched Vanessa's face carefully to see how she would handle this situation, whether she'd immediately cave to his expectations or whether she'd actually enforce the boundary we'd set together about him not being welcome to stay over anymore. For a long, tense moment, she looked absolutely panicked, physically frozen between her boyfriend's assumptions and her mother's clearly stated limits, and I could practically see her brain calculating whether she could somehow sneak him in after I went to bed or convince me to make just one little exception since he'd driven all this way. But then something shifted in her expression. A kind of resolve settled over her features, and she took a deep breath and stepped outside onto the porch to talk to him privately, closing the front door firmly behind her. Through the living room window, I could hear their voices getting progressively louder as the conversation went on, with him clearly not accepting what she was telling him, and her having to repeat herself multiple times. The conversation stretched out for nearly 25 minutes, with Terrence gesturing angrily and Vanessa shaking her head firmly over and over. And when she finally came back inside alone, her hands were visibly trembling, but her jaw was set in determination. "He's gone," she announced to me and the kids, her voice shaking slightly. "He called me some names I'm definitely not going to repeat in front of Tyler and Maya, and he said I was letting you control my life and turn me against him. But Mama, he's gone, and I have to tell you, that was honestly one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my entire life." I crossed the room immediately and pulled her into a tight hug and told her with complete sincerity that I was genuinely proud of her for standing her ground, and I meant every single word from the bottom of my heart. By week 3, we'd settled into something that almost resembled a normal functional routine, with everyone following the posted chore chart most of the time, and Vanessa actually participating in meal planning and household decisions instead of just passively expecting me to handle absolutely everything like before. She came home from her first day at her new waitressing job at the Route 9 diner, exhausted, but also strangely energized, talking excitedly about the customers she'd met and the tips she'd earned, and how good it felt to be building something for herself. 2 weeks later, when her first actual paycheck hit her bank account, she came home that evening without any prompting or reminder from me. She counted out $300 in cash, 3 crisp $100 bills, and placed them directly in my hand with a look of unmistakable pride on her face. "Here's my contribution for this month," she said, and the expression on her face told me this gesture meant far more than just money changing hands. It was about her proving to herself and to me that she could actually keep her word and follow through on commitments. "This feels surprisingly good, Mama," she said quietly, almost like she was confessing something she hadn't expected. "I've never really contributed financially to anywhere I've lived before, not with Raymond, who controlled all the money, and definitely not here before you set these boundaries, and I honestly didn't realize until right now how much it actually matters to feel like I'm pulling my own weight and not just taking from someone else." I squeezed her hand warmly and told her something my own mother had once told me. Responsibility feels like a heavy burden when you're avoiding it, but once you actually pick it up and carry it, you discover it's actually the weight of freedom and self-respect. And she looked at me with tears in her eyes, like she was really hearing me and understanding me for perhaps the first time in our entire complicated relationship. Month 2 brought unexpected and frankly terrifying complications when Raymond started appearing at my house during the daytime hours when he knew Vanessa would be home alone with the kids. Not being overtly threatening or violent like before, but instead coming across as sad and apologetic and remorseful, begging Vanessa to give him another chance and promising with apparent sincerity that he'd completely changed his ways and was going to therapy consistently and doing all the personal work she'd asked him to do years ago. I watched my daughter begin to waver in her resolve, saw that old familiar pull of shared history and comfortable patterns, and maybe this time will be different hope flickering dangerously in her eyes, and I knew with absolute certainty that this moment right here was the critical juncture where she would either backslide into her old destructive patterns or choose something genuinely different for herself and her children. Patricia agreed to see all 3 of us together, me, Vanessa, and even Tyler and Maya in a family session, and during that emotionally intense meeting, Patricia asked Vanessa a question that cut straight through all the rationalizations and excuses right to the heart of the matter. "Vanessa, I want you to imagine that 20 years from now, your daughter Maya comes to you as an adult woman with a man who has hit her multiple times but is now promising he's changed and asking for another chance. What specific advice would you give your daughter in that situation?" Vanessa's face immediately crumpled and tears started streaming down her cheeks as the full weight of that hypothetical scenario hit her, and through her sobs, she said she would tell Maya to run as far and as fast as she possibly could and never look back no matter what promises were made. Patricia nodded slowly and said with gentle firmness, "Then why are you not willing to give yourself that exact same advice you would give to your own daughter?" That single question became the turning point, the moment of clarity that changed everything. And when Raymond showed up at my front door again 3 days later with flowers and apologies, Vanessa spoke to him through the closed and locked door without even opening it, and told him in a clear, firm voice that she was absolutely not coming back to him, was not giving him another chance regardless of his promises, and needed him to stop coming to her mother's house immediately, or she would have no choice but to file for a formal restraining order through the courts. Week 7 brought a different kind of crisis when I got an unexpected phone call from Tyler's school principal asking me to come pick him up immediately because he'd been involved in a serious physical altercation during lunch period, which had never happened before in his entire school history. When I arrived at the school office, I found Tyler sitting in a chair with a visibly bloody nose and tears streaming down his face, looking more emotionally devastated than physically hurt. The assistant principal explained that another boy had been taunting Tyler about his family situation, and when I pressed for details about what exactly had been said, Tyler finally admitted through hiccuping sobs that the other kid had loudly announced to their entire lunch table that Tyler's mom was a pathetic loser who got beat up by her husband and now had to live with her grandma because she was too stupid and worthless to take care of her own kids. Tyler said he'd tried to ignore it at first, had tried to just walk away like his teacher always told him to do, but when the boy wouldn't stop and other kids started laughing, something inside Tyler had just exploded and he'd punched the other kid directly in the face before his brain could even process what his body was doing. Driving home from school with Tyler in the passenger seat, my heart was absolutely shattered listening to him describe how the adult chaos and dysfunction and drama had bled into his innocent child's world in ways we hadn't adequately protected him from. And I realized with devastating clarity that our family's healing journey wasn't just about Vanessa and me working through our issues. It was fundamentally about these precious children who'd been silently watching and absorbing everything and internalizing messages we didn't even know we were teaching them. That evening, we held an unscheduled emergency family meeting, all 4 of us sitting close together on the living room floor instead of formally around the table, and we talked with complete honesty about feelings and changes and pain, and what it really means when adults make serious mistakes and then have to work hard to fix them. Maya, who'd been quieter than usual for days, suddenly asked the question we'd all been carefully avoiding. "Are we going to have to leave Grandma's house soon?" The room went completely silent. Vanessa looked at me, and I looked back at her, and together, speaking in turns and supporting each other, we told both kids the honest truth. Yes, eventually we would find our own apartment as a family, but it would happen when we were truly ready and financially stable, not because Grandma was kicking anyone out or because anyone had failed. Month 3 marked the official halfway point of our original 60-day agreement, except we'd already blown past 60 days and nobody had actually mentioned the deadline because something fundamental had shifted in all of our relationships and interactions. Vanessa had been diligently saving money from every single paycheck and had finally accumulated enough for a full security deposit plus first month rent on a modest apartment, and she'd been seriously apartment hunting online for weeks, showing me listings on her phone almost every evening and genuinely asking for my opinion and input about different neighborhoods and school districts and commute times instead of just announcing decisions after she'd already made them independently. One quiet evening after the kids had gone to bed, she sat me down at the kitchen table with an impressively detailed spreadsheet she'd created, showing her monthly income from the diner, her fixed expenses like car payment and insurance and phone bill, her variable costs like groceries and gas, and her realistic savings goals for the next 6 months. "Mama, I need you to look at this honestly and tell me whether you think I'm actually ready to live independently and support myself and the kids without constantly needing to be rescued," she said, her voice vulnerable and genuinely seeking guidance rather than just looking for approval. I studied that spreadsheet carefully, asked her probing questions about her calculations and assumptions, and finally looked up at her with tears welling in my eyes. "Baby, I think you're absolutely ready," I told her with complete honesty. "I think you've done the hard internal work. You've proven you can follow through on commitments and manage money responsibly. And Vanessa, I am so incredibly proud of the woman you're becoming through all of this struggle." She got very quiet for a long moment, staring down her hands, and then said something that made my heart feel like it might burst. Mama, I know the original plan was for me to move out and get my own place, and we'd go back to seeing each other occasionally on holidays or whatever. But can I ask you something important? When I do get my own apartment, would you be willing to continue doing these Sunday family meetings with us? Because honestly, I don't want to lose this thing we've built together, where we actually talk to each other truthfully and work through problems instead of just letting resentment build up silently. The apartment Vanessa finally chose and signed a lease for was a modest 2-bedroom place in a quiet complex about 15 minutes from my house, close enough to maintain regular connection and contact, but far enough to establish her own independent household and identity separate from mine. The day we went together to the leasing office to sign all the paperwork was emotionally bittersweet in the very best way, watching her carefully read through every single page of that lease agreement before signing, seeing her hand over the deposit check she'd saved entirely on her own without borrowing from me, observing her ask intelligent questions about maintenance procedures and lease terms and tenant responsibilities. All of it felt like watching a bird I'd been carefully nursing back to health finally spread its wings and prepare for flight. We spent an entire weekend moving her belongings and furniture with help from Dorothy and several people from my church community who'd heard about our journey and wanted to support Vanessa's fresh start. And as I helped her unpack boxes in her new kitchen and arrange dishes in her own cabinets, I felt a profound sense of joy and relief that had absolutely no underlying resentment or martyrdom attached to it, just pure happiness at seeing someone I loved deeply finally standing on their own feet. "Mama, thank you," Vanessa said as we stood together in her empty living room surrounded by half-unpacked moving boxes and furniture that hadn't found its permanent place yet. "Thank you not just for letting us stay with you when we desperately needed it, but more importantly for loving me enough and respecting me enough to make me actually grow up and take responsibility for my own life. I was drowning and didn't even realize it, and you threw me a life raft, even though it made me hate you temporarily, and even though it would have been so much easier for you to just let me keep taking advantage of your kindness." The first Sunday after Vanessa officially moved into her own apartment, I woke up in my house that was completely mine again for the first time in many months, walked slowly through rooms that were quiet and orderly and exactly how I left them the night before, made myself a pot of coffee at my own preferred pace without rushing to accommodate anyone else's morning schedule, and sat in my favorite armchair, reading the entire newspaper cover to cover without a single interruption. It felt absolutely glorious and simultaneously achingly lonely, and I understood for the first time that both of those feelings could be completely true at the same time. I could genuinely love having my personal space and freedom and autonomy back, while also missing the sound of children's laughter echoing through the hallways and Vanessa humming while she cooked breakfast. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, my doorbell rang right on schedule, and when I opened the door with a huge smile, there stood Vanessa with Tyler and Maya, all 3 of them holding grocery bags because they'd insisted on bringing ingredients to cook our Sunday family dinner together at Grandma's house. "Ready for our family meeting?" Vanessa asked with a warm, genuine smile, and I ushered them all inside with my heart full of gratitude that we'd somehow found a way to be family that didn't require anyone to disappear or sacrifice their essential self. Our Sunday meetings quickly became the absolute foundation of a completely new kind of relationship, one where we could discuss difficult topics openly and celebrate victories together and hold each other lovingly accountable and offer genuine support without slipping into enabling or codependency. Week after week, we'd gather around my dining room table with Tyler and Maya spreading out their homework while Vanessa and I talked through everything from her evolving dating life to my ongoing doctor appointments to financial planning strategies to parenting challenges she was facing. She started asking for my advice and input again, but this time she was actually listening carefully to my answers and considering my perspective instead of just waiting impatiently for me to agree with whatever she'd already decided independently. I started sharing my own struggles and fears and uncertainties instead of always pretending I had everything perfectly together and figured out, and that mutual vulnerability created a depth and authenticity to our relationship that honestly had never existed before in all our years together. One Sunday afternoon, about 6 weeks after she'd moved out, Vanessa brought up something that had apparently been on her mind. "Mama, I was talking to Aunt Regina last week, and she mentioned that you've been having some kind of regular meetings here at your house on Thursday afternoons with other women from church and the community. Something about boundaries and personal growth. What exactly is that all about?" I smiled because I'd been wondering when someone in the family would finally notice and ask about my Thursday afternoon gatherings, that it started small with just 3 nervous women but had been growing steadily and organically over the past several weeks. After everything we went through together and all the healing work we had to do, Patricia suggested that I might want to consider facilitating an informal support group for other women who are struggling with similar boundary issues and people-pleasing patterns and the feeling of being invisible in their own lives, I explained. "So we meet here every Thursday afternoon at 4, and it's really just a safe space where women can talk honestly and openly about feeling trapped and overwhelmed by everyone else's expectations and demands, and we explore together how to reclaim our power and establish healthy boundaries without drowning in guilt." Vanessa's eyes went wide with surprise and what looked like admiration. "Mama, that's actually amazing," she said. "How many women are coming to these meetings now?" I thought about it for a moment and realized with some genuine surprise that the number had grown from the original 3 nervous women to almost 15 regular weekly attendees. "We're honestly running out of chairs and space in my living room," I admitted with a laugh. "It turns out there are apparently a lot of us out here who spent our entire lives making ourselves smaller and smaller for other people's comfort." Vanessa looked thoughtful and almost vulnerable for a moment before asking hesitantly, "Mama, do you think maybe I could come to one of those meetings sometime? Not as your daughter necessarily, but just as someone who genuinely needs to hear those conversations and learn from other women's experiences." The Thursday afternoon that Vanessa first attended my support group, I felt unexpectedly nervous in a way I hadn't anticipated, worried about how the other women might perceive her presence or whether having my own daughter there would somehow change the careful group dynamic we'd built together over weeks and months. But when it was Vanessa's turn to share her story with the circle, and she told it with raw honesty, not making excuses or shifting blame, but genuinely owning her part in our family dysfunction and talking openly about her difficult journey towards taking real responsibility for her own life and choices, the other women listened with visible empathy and recognition, and several of them told her afterward that hearing directly from someone on the receiving end of boundary setting had helped them understand that enforcing their own limits wasn't about punishing or rejecting their loved ones, but rather inviting everyone into healthier and more authentic relationship. Dorothy pulled me aside afterward as we were cleaning up coffee cups and folding chairs and said something I'll treasure forever. "Beverly, do you even realize what you've actually built here? You took your own pain and confusion and struggle and somehow transformed it into purpose and healing and community. And now you're helping women find voices they thought they'd lost forever or maybe never had in the first place. That's not just personal healing, Beverly. That's creating legacy and changing generations." Month 5, after Vanessa had moved into her own apartment, brought a completely unexpected phone call from someone I never thought I'd hear from again. Raymond's mother, the same woman who'd sent me that hateful, accusatory text message many months earlier, telling me I should be ashamed of myself for abandoning my family in their time of need. "Beverly, I really need to talk to you if you're willing to listen," she said, her voice noticeably smaller and less aggressive and judgmental than I remembered from all our previous interactions. Raymond is back in jail again for violating the terms of his probation, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about my own choices and the things I said to you, and I owe you a sincere apology that's long overdue." I was so genuinely surprised I nearly dropped my phone, because this woman had been my adversary and critic for years, had consistently blamed Vanessa for Raymond's violence and anger, had enabled and excused and protected her son at the direct expense of my daughter's safety and well-being. We agreed to meet for coffee at a neutral location downtown, and she told me a story that sounded painfully and heartbreakingly familiar. She'd spent 30 miserable years making herself completely invisible for her alcoholic husband who drank heavily and raged constantly. And then after he died, she'd spent another 20 years doing exactly the same thing for her son Raymond, and she'd watched Vanessa set firm boundaries and build a new independent life, and realized with devastating clarity that she'd never once done that for herself or taught her son that women deserved basic respect and consideration. "I don't know how to undo all the damage I've caused," she said, crying openly into her coffee cup, "but I'm trying to learn and change, and I was wondering if maybe I could come to one of those Thursday afternoon meetings you facilitate at your house." Adding Raymond's mother to the support group felt genuinely risky and uncomfortable, and I talked it through extensively and carefully with Patricia before finally agreeing to allow it. But something about her obvious brokenness and her apparently genuine desire to change and grow made me want to give her a chance I honestly never thought she'd ask for or want. The first Thursday she actually attended, you could have cut the tension in the room with a knife as Vanessa and Raymond's mother sat on opposite sides of my living room with years of accumulated hurt and blame and anger filling all the space between them like a thick fog. But as the meeting progressed and other women courageously shared their own stories about enabling men who hurt people, about protecting sons at the direct expense of daughters-in-law, about slowly learning to hold people accountable for their actions while still loving them as human beings, something began to gradually soften in the room's atmosphere. By the end of that emotionally charged session, Raymond's mother approached Vanessa tentatively and said with visible difficulty, "I'm truly sorry for every single time I made you feel like Raymond's violence was somehow your fault or something you deserved, and I'm sorry for not protecting you the way a mother should protect vulnerable people in her family." Vanessa stood there silently for what felt like an eternity, and I held my breath wondering how she would respond to this unexpected apology, and finally she said carefully, "I appreciate you saying that, and I want you to know I'm not ready to have any kind of regular relationship with you yet, but I am willing to be in the same room and work on forgiveness gradually, in my own time and at my own pace." It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation or a Hallmark movie moment, but it was honest and real and boundaried, and that felt infinitely more valuable than forced peace or pretend harmony. Week 3 of month 6 brought a piece of mail that would change the entire trajectory of my life in ways I could never have imagined, an official letter from the community center downtown asking if I would be interested in running a formal, structured support group program through their organization, complete with dedicated meeting space and printed resources, and even a modest stipend to compensate me for my time and expertise. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that letter for what must have been 10 full minutes, reading it over and over because it represented something I'd never once imagined for myself at 72 years old, genuine purpose beyond mere survival, meaningful identity beyond grandmother and mother and widow, a role and contribution that was entirely mine and had absolutely nothing to do with taking care of other people's needs and demands. I immediately called Patricia and read her the entire letter word for word, and she laughed with pure, unfiltered joy. Beverly, this is exactly what healing looks like when it's fully realized. This is what happens when you finally stop making yourself small and start taking up the space you've always deserved but were afraid to claim. Are you going to accept their offer? I thought carefully about all the women who gathered faithfully in my living room every Thursday afternoon, thought about the growing waiting list I'd started keeping of people who wanted to join but literally couldn't fit in my space, thought about Tyler asking me just last week what I wanted to be when I grew up and how I hadn't known how to answer because I'd never really asked myself that fundamental question. Yes, I said firmly and clearly. Yes, absolutely, I'm going to do it. Month 7 brought changes and opportunities I truly never could have predicted or planned for when I first set those initial boundaries with Vanessa, what felt like a lifetime ago. The support group at the community center had grown so rapidly that we needed to offer 2 separate sessions just to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. I'd been invited to speak at 3 different churches about healthy family relationships and boundary setting for older women, and a local radio station had even interviewed me on their afternoon talk show about the specific challenges grandmothers face when they're raising or supporting grandchildren while trying to maintain their own identity and well-being. Vanessa watched all of this unfold with something that looked like genuine awe mixed with pride, and one Sunday she said something that brought tears to my eyes. Mama, watching you become fully yourself and step into your own power has somehow given me permission to figure out who I actually am, not who Raymond wanted me to be or who I thought I was supposed to be to make everyone else comfortable, but who I genuinely am at my core. That's honestly the greatest gift you could have possibly given me beyond just providing shelter and support. I realized in that profound moment that by having the courage to save myself first, I had accidentally but powerfully shown her how to save herself, and that toxic generational pattern of women erasing themselves for others had finally broken in our family line. The most unexpected and touching transformation happened with Tyler and Maya, who started bringing their own handwritten meeting agendas to our Sunday family gatherings, complete with specific items they wanted to discuss, like allowance negotiations and screen time limits, and complicated feelings about their father that they'd been too scared to voice before now. Watching them learn at the tender ages of 9 and 7 that their voices genuinely mattered and their needs were valid, and they didn't have to shrink themselves down to keep peace or avoid conflict, made me realize the profound and lasting impact of the work we'd all done together. Maya told me one Sunday with complete seriousness, "Grandma, when I grow up and become an adult, I want to be exactly like you, the new you, not the old you." And when I asked her gently what she meant by that distinction, she said with stunning clarity, "The you who doesn't let people be mean to her and who takes up space without apologizing." Out of the mouths of children comes the most devastating and beautiful truth. Month 8 brought a phone call that tested everything I'd learned about boundaries and self-care in a completely new and challenging way. My sister, Regina, who had criticized me so harshly for setting boundaries with Vanessa and called me selfish and cold-hearted and a terrible mother, was calling from the hospital emergency room where her own daughter, Jennifer, had just brought her after a complete breakdown. "Beverly, I need help, and I don't know who else to call," Regina said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Jennifer has been living with me for 3 years now, not paying any rent or contributing financially, not helping around the house with chores or maintenance, bringing her unemployed boyfriend around constantly, and I just kept taking it all because I truly believe that's what good mothers do, right? But this morning, she called me a terrible mother and said I'd completely ruined her life by not giving her enough, and something inside me just snapped and broke, and my chest started hurting badly, and they brought me here thinking I might be having a heart attack." I listened to my sister describe almost word for word the exact situation I'd been trapped in many months ago, heard my own story reflected back to me like looking in a mirror, and I felt a complicated mixture of vindication and compassion washing over me. "Regina," I said carefully and gently, "do you remember when you told me I was being way too hard on Vanessa and needed to have more compassion and understanding?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "I was completely wrong about everything," she finally whispered. "I didn't understand what you were going through at all, but now I do, Beverly, and I don't have any idea how to fix this mess I've created." I spent the next hour on the phone with Regina, walking her through the exact same steps I'd taken many months before. Find a good therapist who understands family systems, write down clear boundaries before having any conversations, prepare yourself mentally for serious backlash and guilt trips, stand absolutely firm even when it feels cruel or heartless. Remember that enabling someone isn't the same thing as loving them. I gave Patricia's contact information and Angela's number at the community center, and I told her she could attend the support group whenever she felt ready, with absolutely no judgment from me about the harsh things she'd said when she didn't understand my situation. "Regina, I have to be honest with you. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life," I warned her seriously. "Jennifer is going to call you terrible names. Other family members are probably going to take her side and criticize you. You're going to doubt yourself and your decisions every single day, and there will be many moments when you desperately want to give up and go back to the way things were before. But I promise you this, on the other side of all that pain and difficulty is a version of yourself you've forgotten existed or maybe never knew, and she is absolutely worth fighting for." My sister cried and thanked me and said she'd never really appreciated or understood me before, but she absolutely did now. And after we finally hung up, I sat quietly in my living room thinking about how suffering shared and understood can transform into wisdom passed forward, and how our hardest lessons often make us the best teachers for others walking similar paths. Week 2 of month 9 brought a full circle moment that literally took my breath away. I was facilitating the Tuesday evening support group session at the community center when a young woman walked in 15 minutes late, apologizing profusely for interrupting, and when she looked up and made eye contact with me, I realized with genuine shock it was Keisha, Terrence's younger sister, who I'd met only briefly during those chaotic months when Terrence was practically living in my house. "Miss Beverly," she said, looking equally surprised, "I had no idea you were running this group. I'd been searching for something exactly like this because I'm trying desperately to figure out how to set healthy boundaries with Terrence, and it's incredibly hard because he's my brother and I love him and he clearly needs help, but he's also completely draining me financially and emotionally, and I genuinely don't know how to say no without feeling like a horrible, selfish person." The entire room went completely silent as everyone processed this unlikely and somewhat awkward connection, and I felt multiple sets of eyes on me, wondering how I would respond to someone directly related to a person who contributed significantly to my own boundary crisis. I took a slow, deep breath and looked at Keisha with complete, genuine compassion. "You are in exactly the right place," I said warmly and sincerely. "And just so you know clearly, your relationship with your brother is absolutely not your burden to carry or apologize to me or anyone else. We're all here for fundamentally the same reason, to learn that loving someone deeply doesn't mean losing ourselves completely in the process." If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I hope you found something meaningful that resonates with your own experiences, whether you're currently struggling with boundaries right now, or you're watching someone you love sacrifice themselves for others, or you're simply curious about what it actually means to reclaim your life at any age. Please take a moment to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and leave a comment telling me about your own boundary setting experiences. I genuinely read every comment, and your stories help me know I'm not alone in this important work. Hit that like button if this story touched something in you, and please share it with anyone who might need to hear the message that it's never too late to stop being invisible and start being your authentic self. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story, and always remember, you are allowed to take up space without apologizing. You are allowed to have needs and express them clearly, and you are allowed to choose yourself without drowning in guilt or shame. That's not selfish behavior, that's survival, and sometimes survival is the most radical and loving act we can offer both ourselves and the people who depend on us to model what healthy relationships actually look like. I'll see you in my next video, and until then, keep reclaiming your beautiful, powerful, absolutely irreplaceable self.